You are listening to the Foreign Policy Focus podcast.
We cannot wait for the final proof. The smoking gun could come in the form of a mushroom cloud.
Haven't you driven enough people from their homes already? Bulldoze their villages, seize their property and their laws. They had no part in making it.
Now working in Libya with friends and allies, we've demonstrated what collective action can achieve in the 21st century.
Now the host of the show, Kyle Inslee.
This is episode 500 of the Foreign Policy Focus podcast, and for this milestone episode, I have Scott Horton on the show. He's the host of the Scott Horton Show, author of the great book, Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, editorial director of antiwar.com, and he's the boss over at the Libertarian Institute. Scott, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, man. Happy to have you at the Libertarian Institute and at antiwar.com. Colin, thanks for having me on.
All right. Well, I want to do a little bit more of an evergreen topic for the milestone episode here. And I thought Star Wars might be a good one because I know it's something you're really into. And, Star Wars, there's a lot of war topics in it. And I think they do a really good job of, explaining like morality and corruption and politics and a whole bunch of good themes for us to touch on. I actually have this article that you wrote apparently 15 years ago now. After the release of the Revenge of the Sith, the third movie, the last of the prequels, Star Wars and the American Empire. It's up at antiwar.com, way back in the archives, but I'll link to it in the show notes page. So, Scott, one of the things you kind of say at the end of the article there is really interesting. That is how the, Old Republic, the Jedi, and the prequels, should be a lesson to us Americans as to, what could happen to our republic, if plagued by anti-war or just not anti-war, plagued by, endless war. So going back to like the Clone Wars we talked about a while ago, explain to us how the Jedi could be a lesson to us Americans on the lessons of war.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so that's funny. I had forgotten about that article. I remember that at the time I did sort of an audio version of it on my radio show at the time. And I think there's a link in that article, and I have some sound bites and stuff to explain, sort of my taking you through the prequels. I think people can agree that the prequels were poorly executed, but for me, there are some hugely important themes in there. And see, when I was a kid, the prequels were like, yeah, our wish that someday they're ever going to do that. But we always thought they weren't. I mean, George Lucas said he was never even going to do 1, 2, and 3. And so when they talked about the Old Republic and the Clone Wars and all these things, it was like this ancient Obi-Wan Kenobi remembering this time that was shrouded in ancient mythology, even within Star Wars, which is itself ancient mythology in a way, right? And so it was kind of always really exciting and interesting to speculate about and wonder about what were the Clone Wars and who did what and how did the Emperor become the Emperor and the era of the Jedi Knights give way to the dark times, as Obi-Wan called them, and all those things. So, it was really important for me that, to find out, well, what really did happen. So when these prequels came out, and I can compare them this way to the Disney things, that even though they were poorly executed, and we all wish there had never been a Jar Jar Binks and all of these kinds of things, that at least it's the true history of the galaxy, man. Unlike, whatever garbage that J.J. Abrams came up with, or, this other loser that did episode 8. I mean, that's just like a Star Wars fan film on YouTube. It's not canon. It's just some idiot's idea. It doesn't mean anything. Whereas the prequels, as poorly executed as they were, that's what really happened. That's how Anakin became Darth Vader. That's how the Republic became the Empire. And that's how the Chancellor became the Emperor. And so it is what it is. It could have been refined and told much better. But to me, kind of that doesn't count, right? Like, forget all the pastels and all this stupid crap. Like, this is how Palpatine became, overthrew the Republic. He got himself elected. And if you listen to George Lucas talk about this stuff, he says it. He was fascinated with democracies that turn into dictatorships. That, of course, the world's lousy with dictatorships. There's always kings and queens and emperors and pharaohs and self-appointed warlords and whoever all over the world. But what's fascinating is when you have a democracy that then gives way to a dictatorship, like what happened in ancient Rome or what happened in Germany in the 1930s, or what could happen here. And in fact, he elaborated too that a lot of people don't know this because it's kind of erased by Watergate and the fact that Nixon resigned. He was the only president to resign his office and leave because he was going to be convicted and removed from office by the Senate if he didn't quit first, which is pretty impressive. And it overshadows the fact that after his reelection in 1972, which was a massive landslide, that his people were talking about revisiting and repealing the 22nd Amendment. Was it the 25th Amendment? I think it was the 22nd Amendment, limiting the president to 2 terms. All the presidents had observed George Washington's precedent by refusing to serve as president for life and doing 2 terms max until Franklin Roosevelt did 4 terms, made himself president for life, essentially. And they outlawed that. So we're not going to allow that anymore. It's 2 terms, term limit for a president from now on. And they were talking about repealing that so that Nixon could stay in office so he could run again in 76. And that was what got Lucas interested, or really was the spark for his idea that he wanted to sort of do a space opera, Flash Gordon / ancient Greek mythology / whatever the hell. But the lesson is about how a republic becomes a dictatorship. How a republic becomes an empire. Well, and see, that's the key. The answer is war. The answer is the emergency. And that's the famous line from The Empire Strikes Back, as Han Solo says, "There's no time to discuss this in committee." And Princess Leia, of course, says, "I'm not a committee." But the point is that this is an emergency. And so one man is in charge, and he's going to have to make the decisions, and you're going to have to trust it. In that case, it's Han Solo talking. But in the case of the Clone War, it's the Chancellor that has to be trusted. Now there's no time to discuss this in committee because our people are dying and something has to happen. And so emergency power must be invoked to come and make things right before it's too late. And so that's the deal. And then so in Lucas's telling, the Sith Lord figures this out. And if he wants to turn the democracy into a dictatorship, he's got to set it to war. He's got to, continue amending the Constitution with emergency powers. He's got to militarize, and he's got to centralize authority. And then, of course, the big joke is he tricks the Jedi Knights into taking over the galaxy, fighting a droid army that he had created for them just to fight, so that they could lead the stormtroopers into consolidating their military power over the galaxy. Then at the last minute, he has spoilers here. Then at the last minute, he has the stormtroopers shoot all the Jedi in the back. Now that they've done, served their purpose, they all get shot in the back, and the Emperor is left with his clone army that rules the whole galaxy. And so that's the answer to the question. How did this one senator become a dictator? And how did he get rid of the Jedi Knights? And what he did was he tricked them into defending the Republic to death. He tricked them into expanding the power of the government in a way, in the name of protecting galactic society. And they turned out to enslave it. And then, by the way, so in the original trilogy, in episode 4, we find out we don't see the Emperor, but Governor Tarkin, who was modeled after Nixon himself. Tarkin says that, I just received word that the Emperor has dissolved the Imperial Senate permanently. The last remnants of the old Republic have been swept away. And in fact, in the book, the novelization of it, the line, I guess this is from the original script, the line is due to the emergency of the rebellion against the Empire. So because of Princess Leia's rebellion, this is the excuse to abolish the Senate, right? Well, in the prequel trilogy, it's not Princess Leia and the heroes. It's Count Dooku and the droid army are the ones who are opposing the Galactic Republic, the Chancellor Palpatine's authority. And it's all a big false flag. Count Dooku works for him all along. It'd be like if Jeff Davis and General Lee secretly worked for Abraham Lincoln all along. just to give him an excuse to expand the Union Army into the South in that way. Something like that. It was all a hoax, and yet it was enough of an emergency to get him to invoke the emergency powers and militarize the galaxy and everything. And so, again, this was the lesson that George Lucas was trying to teach. And it worked. I mean, for me, this is a huge part of my libertarian upbringing, honestly. I mean, I remember being probably 4 or 5 years old and asking my mom, I mean, really young, like I'm definitely not older than kindergarten, probably 5 years old, asking my mom, what's a Senate? And her trying to explain to me, like we're standing there in the kitchen, I can still remember, and she's explaining something along the lines of, well, the people from a community will vote for one guy to represent them, and then they go to a big meeting room and pass the laws that we all have to live by. And, the way you'd explain it to a 5-year-old, something like that. So then, well, what does it mean then if the Senate has dissolved this? See, I blew the line. So what does it mean then if the emperor has dissolved the Senate permanently? Oh, okay. Well, that means that he's a dictator and there is no law anymore. He's just going to do what he wants because he has Darth Vader to enforce it for him, and nobody can stand against him. And so it's, evil, arbitrary, unaccountable power. And, this is, and so, and even just to hear Obi-Wan Kenobi talk about it was, the old republic, man, it was great back then, before the dark times, before the empire, because it was the empire that had killed the republic. And so, it's a fantasy movie for kids. So it's all very black and white. Republic, freedom, rule of law, empire, corruption, and murder. The good guys versus the bad guys, blue lightsaber versus red. Whose side are you on? And so, that's oversimplistic. In fact, I have a friend who hates Star Wars because he thinks that it kind of just like old, black and white sped up footage of Hitler ranting at a podium. It makes people feel like if the enemy is not wearing a black cloak and shooting lightning out of his hands, then it's not empire yet. We're not, it's not a crisis until it's actually black magic or whatever, which that's just the movies, right? In reality, the emperor looks like cross-eyed dumbass George W. Bush, right? Or, his doppelganger in drag, Barack Obama, something like that. And they don't have magic powers. And most of the time they think they're doing the right thing, if you could believe it. You know what I mean? So it's the system itself that is evil. Even more than the individuals there, not to let them off the hook for their decisions, you understand? But it does kind of, in a way, it drives the lesson home, but it also makes it kind of out of reach. That unless the empire is just outright nationalizing your property, then it hasn't come to a bad enough point to resist yet, when, really that's long since passed. And look at real life. I mean, what has been worse for American society than the empire? The magic word here being opportunity costs. All of the wealth destroyed and all of the emergency powers that have been consolidated and claimed by X, Y, and Z multi-jurisdictional task forces out there doing God knows what to people in the name of the emergency. And where we live in what experts agree is a post-constitutional society, where really the Constitution only says that the presidency can exist, the court and the Congress can stand around, acting like they're in charge too, and while the president and the bureaucracy take over the whole planet. and no one can do a thing about it. And it's all in the name of the war. And now look at us, when there's a pandemic, we're not ready. And when, push comes to shove, it turns out that even the veneer of the authority of our government inside our country is, on shaky ground and ready to collapse even at a moment's notice. And very few probably would predict that just one more broken neck, one more, wasn't a broken neck, but one more, murdered black man on camera by the cops. And you're going to see, cities from coast to coast rioting over this stuff. Because in fact, we've not been spending all our time attempting to form a more perfect union. We've been, wasting all of our efforts destroying other people's societies and, turning our own population against itself, against each other. And so, not that I'm sticking up for the state, but I'm just saying for their own sake, and this is true too about the Empire, right? In Star Wars, the Empire only lasted 20 years. And as soon as Darth Vader killed the Emperor and the Sith were dead, the entire galaxy rose up and overthrew their sorry asses. Because as Princess Leia says, the more you tighten your grip, the more people slip through your fingers. Regular, good, decent people hate cops. People who aren't criminals. People who've never committed a crime. People who actually, if they've ever dealt with a cop, it was that one time that the cop helped them maybe. They still hate cops because they see who they are and what they do and how they treat people and how there's no accountability and the absolute literal murder that they get away with. And, it all is, it's as Chalmers Johnson wrote in his third book, Nemesis. You cannot, these are mutually exclusive concepts, having a limited republic and a world empire. And if you don't give up your empire, you're going to live under it. And it's going to be a tyranny, and everybody's going to hate it. And meanwhile, it doesn't have to be this way at all, right? And that's the real joke is if only Jar Jar Binks hadn't given him the emergency powers, if only the American people had not supported Bush and Clinton and Bush and Obama and these horrible people and their horrible policies, then it wouldn't be like that. It was choices that were made by grown adults to make things the way that they are. And, it's all, again, opportunity cost. Just think. And I think everybody agrees with this now, right? That the 21st century didn't have to be this way. That George W. Bush did not have to do that. And man, we wish he never had. And if he hadn't, we'd have never had a Barack Obama. And if we'd never had a Barack Obama, we'd have never had a Donald Trump. And the whole thing is like Doc Brown says in Back to the Future 2, we're off on a skew to a tangent to an alternate timeline where Biff Tannen is the president of the United States somehow. And it's all because we embraced empire when we were supposed to eschew it.
Yeah. So I think one of the interesting things in your article and one of the things that I think when I first saw the prequel movies, I was too young to get, and I wish it would have been a little bit more obvious is how the Jedi were making mistakes here, and they, really weren't just fighting against some really bad people, but, were just chasing a band of separatists around, the galaxy and wasting all the resources and making a bad name for themselves. I guess it does. After I watched the Clone Wars series, it came through a lot more clearly than it does in the show. But I guess it is just really interesting to me how the how in a sense you could like kind of take this and see like, the Jedi essentially create the situation for themselves, and in a way are the bad guys of the prequel movies because they make this happen. And it's a way that you could, I think, for somebody who would have a hard time understanding how like the police or a Jedi Knight is the bad guy. This is how it happened. And so I don't know. I love that example. And the fact you point this out in your article that George Lucas didn't write this as, the terror wars. Like it wasn't meant, I guess, written by him as an analogy. But I mean, to the absurdity that they're, chasing General Bin Laden through the Outer Rim in Star Wars. It's just like us trying to hunt down Grievous in Afghanistan. And so I don't know. Do you think Lucas had a crystal ball, or how I think you write the article? It's just great that George Bush ends up playing the role of the Sith, not the other way around. But how do we let this happen? Because like in Star Wars, especially in the movies, you never see the people or what are the people doing. Like I think Padme refers to them sometimes. The people are suffering or whatever, but you never see them or are harmed in any way by the galaxy. So. How do we let this happen when it was so obviously laid out in a major, saga that everybody was paying attention to at the movies?
Yeah. No, I don't know. I mean, that's the whole thing about it. I mean, the prequels didn't really come out until it was already too late. And the first one came out in 99. But yes, I mean, it's clear that the story already was like that before Bush. And, again, in the original series, the Rebel Alliance are the excuse to get rid of the Senate and consolidate the empire even further. So the concept of the government always needing hobgoblin boogeyman out there to fight is timeless and universal, and was, playing itself out again in the same era that this movie came out. And yeah, you probably couldn't get more explicit in the analogy that was essentially a coincidence that, with General Grievous or Count Dooku as Bin Laden leading the terrorists out there. And this is the excuse to turn the Republic into the Empire. It's the excuse to, expand the U.S. troops out there to conquer the world. And of course, what's funny is the special operations guys oftentimes refer to themselves as Jedi Knights. And it's like, yeah, you're so convinced that you're the good guys, but that's the story of the Jedi Knights. They destroyed the Republic because they were so convinced that they were the good guys out on their adventures, killing people, laying siege. And really, what's the story? The story is that there were systems that wanted to secede from the Republic, and the Republic won't let them, So whether they're led by a guy with a red sword or not, Obi-Wan and Anakin are invading and conquering planet after planet, system after system, and forcing them back into the Union from which they want to secede. And see, it bothers me about the Clone Wars, cartoons and all of that. I mean, first of all, Episode 2 should have been Episode 1, and then Episode 2 should have been the Clone Wars. So they show you some of this stuff in the movie, and then Episode 3, let that be 3 kind of thing is how it should have been. They could have just referred back to Anakin's childhood. They didn't have to do all that. But anyway, in the Clone Wars, it was like the guys who made it, the transition that you're talking about, where they really start to show how, the gray areas in which the Jedi are operating. So it's like they didn't even start bringing that up until like the very last season or two, maybe, where really that was supposed to be the thing the whole time, right? And they always show Yoda as all wise and great and good all the time, but that's not the story, right? The story should be that quite literally Yoda is up in his ivory tower using the Force and expanding his own thing, and he's essentially turned over the war to Sam Jackson and to people who don't have as good of an insight. He's abandoned his own insight and his own responsibility and kind of let things spin out of control here. And all the Jedi are clouded in their vision, and they're all essentially serving a tyrannical campaign. See, this is part of the problem with it being so obvious that Count Dooku is a bad guy and that everything that he's doing is evil and against the Republic and whatever, because they're not showing the side of the story that the Republic was corrupt. The Republic was ripe for the takeover by the likes of Palpatine, the Sith Lord. And that when Palpatine hired Count Dooku and got him to leave the Jedi Order and go and create this separatist movement, the thousands of systems rallied to the separatist movement and said, we don't want to be in the Republic anymore. And we never see their side of the story. They're just evil corporations or bankers or bad guys, in a conspiracy with an obvious bad guy. When that's too cartoony, it takes out, it erases from the story, because the story is supposed to be, as you were just saying, it's really the Jedi are helping accidentally because they're deceived and blind by their own arrogance. They are deceived by the Chancellor the Sith Lord into doing all his dirty work and into destroying the society that they're trying to save. And so that should have been kind of a little bit like blatant all along. They're like, geez, we're torturing people now, or we're, whatever it is that we're doing. Geez, this planet, they don't even want to have anything to do with our fight, but we're going to conquer their planet just as a staging area against the separatists. You know what I mean? They should have been showing more and more of the Jedi's transgressions against what we would consider to be their principle in the name of expedience, in the name of the emergency. We've got to end this war now, Obi-Wan. We can't wait. And so to end it sooner than later, we're going to go ahead and do a thing we never would have done, right? And that's how they should have been portraying the Clone Wars all the way through. So that by the time the Chancellor says, the Jedi tried to do a coup d'etat and overthrow me, people believe it. And people go, yeah, the Jedi really aren't the heroes we thought they were. And I heard that they're the ones that really started the war in the first place. And that's plausible in people's minds because the Jedi have not been acting heroically. They have not been acting as peacekeepers. They've been making matters worse. They've been conquering people against their will, you know? So by the time the Chancellor says, well, obviously Sam Jackson is more evil than I am, the people in the crowd go, yeah, obviously he is. Who elected Sam Jackson? And he was trying to kill our elected chancellor with a sword? Clearly, he's the aggressor. He wasn't trying to defend us. He was trying to destroy democracy and take it over for the Jedi, just like the chancellor says. And the chancellor was able to make that case seem plausible because it was. And so this is part of where the story fell down. Anyway, I'm going on too long about that. But that should have been more the focus. Was like, where the hell is Yoda? He's up in his ivory tower again. And nobody can reach him. And so we're going to have to figure out what to do without him again this time. You know, that kind of deal. And in fact, you know what always bothered me about episode 3 is when Anakin tells Sam Jackson, and this is part because Lucas is so lazy. He's got like his second unit director running things. Nobody's paying attention. There's no accountability on the set, apparently. So I got Sam Jackson and Anakin in front of the blue screen. And Anakin says to Sam Jackson, he goes, listen, I just figured out that Chancellor Palpatine is the Sith Lord. And Sam Jackson gets the line completely wrong and says, a Sith Lord? When that's not the line, because they already knew there was a Sith Lord. They were trying to figure out who it was and what the game was. And they knew that the Jedi were in danger, but they couldn't figure it out. The dark side was clouding their vision. They couldn't figure it out. So the line should have been, the Chancellor is the Sith Lord, right? That's the shock. The guy that we've been working for this whole time? Oh, shit. And then you put the puzzle pieces together. That means the leader of the Separatists is his apprentice. Count Dooku must have been working for him. The whole war is a giant screw job. Oh, my God. Nuclear bomb goes off in Sam Jackson's head. The Chancellor's the Sith Lord. Oh, man. But instead he goes, a Sith Lord, because whoever's the director on set doesn't know the story, I guess. And so he's surprised to find out there's a Sith Lord anywhere on Coruscant, or that there would be, or that has anything to do with this. And then, even though that would make no sense at all, apparently, he takes Anakin's word for it immediately and heads right over there. When it's just bad directing, I guess. Bad lots of things about that, the way that they executed it all. But anyway, I don't know. Sorry.
Now, yeah, I mean, I guess one of the other things that you point out is that by recording directing and putting out 4, 5, and 6, you know, the story there first, you know, Yoda's the hero, the Jedi are the good guys. And so I guess it does add like a little bit more. It makes it easier to see the Jedi as Americans just because they were already portrayed like as the good guys are, you know, at least against the Empire and everything like that. And so then, you know, you get to these movies and unfortunately they didn't do enough to make it obvious the Jedi were making mistakes. But you know, this again, like, I don't know, you've seen like all the Clone Wars. Did you watch the new season?
Yeah.
Yeah. At least in that new season, they have like, you know, the girl in there whose mother was somehow killed by a Jedi's actions, and how like callous the woman was. You know, I wish
they show Moff Tarkin. They show more of the militarization of Coruscant and that kind of thing too.
I wish
they really waited till the very last minute with that stuff. You know, I thought, and frankly, the guys that did the Clone Wars cartoons are the best in Star Wars world now, certainly compared to the people who put the prequels together and all of that stuff. So, but yeah, I think they should have all along had, you know, the Jedi Council has ordered us to do this. And then Anakin and Obi-Wan looking at each other like, really? We're doing that now? And then it's so obvious, right? That, yeah, you do the torture, the spying, you do all of the Bush and Obama policies, assassinating Coruscantian citizens when they're out in, you know, the Yemen system or whatever it is, right? Go ahead and you know what they did in, oh man, you know what? I don't remember which season this was, dude, but it was in 2013. They had a whole series. In fact, the Saw Gerrera character, the Forrest Whitaker character from Rogue One, he was introduced in the cartoon series, in the Clone Wars cartoon series, and The whole thing was a, obvious, clumsy analogy to Syria. And here's where it really pisses me off. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. So in the episode, Jabhat al-Nusra are the moderate rebels against a terrible tyrant on this planet, but they're not really part of the Clone Wars. And so the Jedi Council doesn't have the authority to invade the planet and overthrow the Separatists on behalf of the pro-Republic forces or anything like that. And so their ability to intervene is unfortunately limited. So instead, they send CIA, Anakin and Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka, I guess, to go and back the moderate rebels against Bashar al-Assad. And the moderate rebels are great heroes. And it's so unfortunate that the Republic can't come and save them and all of this stuff. And essentially at the time, it wasn't even telling a Star Wars story. In the moment, it was simply pro-NATO, pro-intervention, pro-Al-Qaeda propaganda regarding the Syrian war. Is completely disgusting. And you wonder where that stuff comes from. Is that just because they got goddamned Democrats writing this stuff? Or is it because like somebody came to them and said, we really want you to do Syria war analogy episode or what? And it was like a 3-episode series and all of this stuff. And yet, check it out. They could have had a whole thing about look how corrupt America, the old republic, is getting here. That now we have the CIA in the form of Obi-Wan and Anakin backing Al-Qaeda suicide bombers and terrorists and head choppers and killers just because they don't like this dictator, just because the dictator of this planet is allied with the dictator of this other planet that their other ally doesn't like, Israel. And so go ahead and show that this is the corruption of the Clone Wars, that you've got Obi-Wan and Anakin lying to themselves and everybody else that these head-chopping suicide bombers are moderates and that the ends justify the means of supporting guys who, these guys were the bad guys in the last war. And they could have done that, right? They could have said, man, these guys, a lot of them are mercenaries from our war in the Iraq system, where they were the bad guys on the side of the separatists. And now we're backing them. And they cut the heads off of Druze, or whatever you call space Druze, whenever they won't convert, right? So they could have done a whole episode where it was about Syria, but it was like elbow you in the ribs real good episode about Syria. Where, again, you're showing the transition of the limited republic to the corrupt evil empire. And you're seeing its most dedicated and loyal servants carrying out these wishes. Again, for the soldiers who call themselves Jedi Knights and don't understand that, in the original trilogy, not the original, but the prequel trilogy, it's the Jedi Knights who ruin everything by going along with the whims of their dear leader.
Yeah. So I want to ask you one question about the newer movies. Well, not really a question, but just say the only thing about those movies that I thought had, a really good theme to it was when they're on like the casino planet or whatever, and they find out the weapons makers and everything like that. But do you have anything anything else positive from the sequel movies other than that to say, or is it other than that all trash?
I mean, even that was executed in a terribly ham-handed fashion. There had to have been another way to do that. I like the concept, the same company making the TIE fighters is making the X-Wings and whatever. But at the same time, it didn't really make any sense in the story. I mean, he's saying some businessmen are cashing in on it. Fine. But the story of the military-industrial complex, of course, is more like, they're the reason we have an empire at all, where, they're the major driving force behind its creation in a real sense. Whereas in Star Wars, that's just not the case, So, that's just the whatever the First Order, which made no sense at all anyway, had its own internal logic that was far more about, imposing their own idea of order rather than just cashing in for their cronies at Lockheed and Raytheon and that kind of thing, So it didn't really fit in the story that much. It was an okay aside, and that movie itself was just an absolute abortion. Episode 8 is just the worst movie that was ever produced. And that guy, Rian Johnson, Wars. I mean, just, my God, that thing was horrible in every possible conceivable way. And that's true about all of them. All three of the sequels. They're just terrible. In fact, I saw a thing on YouTube. A guy did a little rundown of, they leaked the, I'm sorry, I can't remember the guy's name, who did the original script for episode 9. And it was way better than this stupid Palpatine is still alive and all of this crap. The whole, man, episode 9 was so bad. And it was the least bad of the 3. He asked me to say something positive. I'm like, no. Oh, by the way, right now, my email box that I'm clicked on, it says at the bottom, total 1138. Would you believe that? While we're having this conversation, I got, just coincidentally, the number 1138 is on my screen. But anyway, the entire, society of the planet Earth ought to all unite and declare that episodes 7, 8, and 9 never happened and are not canon, have nothing to do with anything. And, even the books, I tried to read one of the books that was like in the lead up to it or something, kind of given background, where just terrible. I couldn't even get more than 2 or 3 chapters through. I mean, the whole idea that 30 years after they defeated the Empire, the Republic has no power. They took over the whole galaxy, and then they completely disbanded their military, even though a third of the galaxy is now being conquered by the Nazis again. And the only force opposed to them is Blackwater, Academy or whatever, as it's now called, run by Eric Princess Leia. Eric Princess Leia. There you go. See, I could have done that the first try through. And now, so there's just this small mercenary organization that's fighting the evil Galactic Empire, and the rest of the galaxy has stood down. So now all of a sudden, it's the plucky rebels versus the Empire again, just like in episode 4, even though they won at the end of episode 6. Oh, and now Luke Skywalker is a bum, and Han Solo lost the Falcon and went back to smuggling. And the whole thing is just stupid. It was so stupid. The whole thing made no sense. They pick up the girl. She goes, listen, I have this information in my robot I need to take to Princess Leia. Han Solo says, oh, okay. Well, I could take you straight there. But instead, I'm going to go to this bar planet, and I'm going to walk right in the front door with you and the orange robot with me. And I'm going to ask the lady there to give you a ride to Princess Leia. When there was no reason at all for that to even happen. Why would they do that? Just because, well, she's got to get her lightsaber from somewhere, and that's what it says in the script. And then what happens? The bad guys come, and they blow up the whole bar and kill like 600 people. And it's all because Han Solo brought the heat on them, when it makes no sense at all that he would go there in the first place. It's just stupid. And that was how they got started. That's the one that people like, episode 7. It was a worst piece of crap.
No, I thought 7 was the worst because it was just 4, but bad.
Yeah, it's terrible. So, and the directing of the girl, like the whole first sequence of the girl on the desert planet, she's a terrible jerk, but for no reason. Like, she doesn't look like the kind of person who's lived a hard life. People who've lived a hard life got a pretty thick sense of humor. And, like, you know what I mean? She doesn't seem hard at all. She seems like a spoiled little brat. How can she be a spoiled little brat when she lives in an AT-AT? Whatever the hell. And, like, whoever was just directing those scenes, where, like, when she first meets the black guy, the stormtrooper, and she's just a total jerk to him. It's like, why? You'd think she would be happy to have a new friend or something. You know what I mean? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. And the whole thing with the monster, and the whole thing, every bit of that, just was terrible, dude. Just friggin' terrible.
Yeah, well, hopefully, however they decide to move forward with Star Wars.
Wait, more about
content.
How terrible it was.
Okay.
The story of Star Wars is about America. The story of Star Wars is about how the Republic became the Empire, and then about how the Americans who love freedom the most undid all that. What is the sequel trilogy about? The sequel trilogy is not about America. In fact, I saw a thing where J.J. Abrams was like, yeah, our thing was sort of like, what if the Nazis who fled to Argentina, what if they'd been able to, like, put together a new military and have another shot? So he didn't even have it in his mind. And by the way, if he had been writing and thinking about America, he's just some stupid conventional Hillary Clinton Democrat. And so he wouldn't have had any kind of insight anyway. All the cool ironies and all the like interesting parts of it would have just been completely retarded junior high school Democratic 101 politics, just like watching Mark Hamill on Twitter, it would have just been as bad anyway. But here he wasn't even writing about America. He wasn't even saying like, hey guys, this movie is for us, about us. He's got the rebels are all played by Brits, the black guy and the Jedi girl. And I guess Poe Dameron is an American. But in the original trilogy, the good guys are all Americans and the bad guys are all British. Here they got Brits playing the stars. So even on the most nominal kind of level, it's not even about us. And then the story itself, he even said, is not supposed to be about us. It's not about anything. It's just a stupid spaceship movie, dude. Don't you get it? Spaceships, lightsabers, but no heart and no lesson. Nothing to learn, nothing to care about. I saw a quote of the poor girl, Daisy Ridley. Said, we made these movies with love. How can you all hate it so much? And it's like, I'm sorry. Like, it's not your fault. You're just the actress who was poorly directed to carry out 3 absolutely horrible scripts. You didn't add to the story of Star Wars at all. And, I don't know what Lucas's version of the sequel trilogy would have been. If you listen to him, it would have also been horrible and stupid. He wanted it to be all about the Wills and the midi-chlorians and all of this stuff. So who knows? It would have been what? Like that movie from the 60s where they, shrink people down and inject them in your veins. You're going to go fight a Star War against some midi-chlorians somewhere. I don't know. Who knows what Lucas's version was, but it almost had to be better than this stuff. And again, just like with the prequels, at least Lucas's version would have been the real story because it's his story. This galaxy exists in his imagination, mostly, people have chipped in, of course, but to just have some garbage that J.J. Abrams and this other idiot thought of, it doesn't serve any purpose other than to disgrace the whole thing. It always did make a lot of money. And so there always was the risk, and maybe it's been since episode 1, really, that, or even Return of the Jedi, where it's the money comes first and the story's not as important. I think Lucas, even when he made the prequels, he didn't understand how much we loved Han, Luke, and Leia, and Chewie, and the robots, man. We cared about them and what happened to them, and the way that he put it together with, especially Han, Luke, and Leia, like these 3, the way that they casted them, maybe they just hit the jackpot with that cast and, the way that we all reacted to them and that kind of thing. But nobody ever cared about, what's his name, Anakin, the guy that played Anakin. And they never gave us a chance to care about him, really, right? Like they made him a bratty little kid in the first one, which I think everybody was way too hard on that kid. It wasn't his fault, the way that they wrote that movie, but so it wasn't the same actor, it was a totally different actor. Now it's 10 years later. And so any connection we had to the kid in episode 1, pretty much, got to start over with a whole new actor in episode 2. And then he's terrible in episode 2. He's not anybody anyone would fall in love with. He's, a bratty jerk. And then so there's no real, connection there. It's not like, when they all go to rescue Han Solo, you care. They go to rescue, from Jabba's palace or whatever. But when they go to rescue Obi-Wan from the monster pit, it's like, whatever. You know what I mean? You're not anywhere near as like connected to the characters and how desperate they must be to get their friend back or whatever. You know what I mean? It's just doesn't equal it in any way at all. And then, in episode 3, same thing, where the way that the characters interact with each other. It's like, do you really care that Padme is sad about how Anakin's acting or anything like, you know what I mean? Like if it had been Luke had betrayed Leia like that, it would have been a bigger deal. You know what I mean? It would have mattered to you because of who they already were to you. But they just didn't really they didn't really develop those characters at all. So it was like you have nothing left but the politics. But then the politics, they didn't really execute that either, very well either. They didn't have to show the Senate. They didn't show the Senate in episode 4. They didn't have to do it. And it made people so mad that there were politics in the movies that, oh, God, another Senate scene. And it's like, yeah, I mean, this isn't supposed to be intergalactic C-SPAN. Like, couldn't you just have two characters explain to each other what they heard just happened. Did you hear they just passed a new emergency law and they're creating a new army? Holy shit, blah, blah, whatever, you know? They didn't have to go through the whole motion of showing what that looked like. Or at least, you know, they could have done much less of that. But anyways, I don't know. Fucking,
Right. Well, at least those movies were cool. The new ones, you know, the spaceship scenes are stupid. The bombers in the beginning of the eighth movie, I can't believe that you have Star Wars and nobody thought to put you know, a missile or some kind of engine on the back of a bomb. You had to get your bomber right over the top of its target to hit anything with it, and it's super slow. I mean, the whole spaceship stuff in that movie is absolutely ridiculous. And
the whole movie, see, you just remind me, I swear to God, I'm like a trauma-based mind control victim where I just completely blank this stuff out from my PTSD. That you just reminded me for the first time in like a year or more that the major plot of that movie was a slow speed chase that made, on the face of it, no sense at all. It even begins with the enemy ships launch TIE fighters against the rebel ships. There's only 2 or 3 rebel ships left. The TIE fighters are tearing them to pieces, and then including the Princess Leia Mary Poppins scene and all of that. But then General Hux orders all the TIE fighters to return to the Star Destroyers. Why? He says, because I can't cover you from back here. What? So what? TIE fighters don't need cover from Star Destroyers. They're already fast enough. Apparently the Star Destroyers are not. But the TIE fighters are fast enough to catch up to the rebel ships and blow them to pieces. And then just because the script demanded it. Well, we already decided that the plot of this movie is going to be a slow speed chase. So we'll just have to have this throwaway line where General Hux calls back all the TIE fighters, including the one being flown by the main bad guy who just unquestioningly follows his orders. And then, so that's up. The major plot of the movie is how to solve the slow speed chase. That the solution to the slow speed chase from the bad guy's point of view is right there, and they cancel it for no obvious reason other than the script demanded it so that they could have their stupid slow speed chase, which is the dumbest. I can't believe that was a plot of that goddamn movie.
all right. Well, I don't know if you have anything else about Star Wars. Before we wrapped here, I did want to ask, the past like couple months, news cycles have been absolutely crazy, but right now we're recording this right off a week where there's been protests everywhere. They burned down a police precinct in Minneapolis. So I don't know. I know you have opinions on cops, Scott, and I thought I was interested in what you thought about them burning down that precinct.
Yeah. Well, I am for that. I am against any collateral damage, property damage against innocent people. And I understand when people riot when they're mad as hell, but it is such a bad decision to attack and destroy innocent people's property who have nothing to do with it. Under what? Some communist theme that somehow a small business owner has some modicum of influence over the police department and its brutality against people poorer than that small business owner. I mean, that's just garbage. That's just garbage. And what it does, unfortunately, is it makes the rest of society think that, well, I don't know, maybe we really do need these cops if that's how y'all are going to act. Going around and, you know, I saw a clip this morning of black militiamen standing around with rifles protecting black-owned businesses. And but if anybody else does that, they're terrible people. When the protesters, I'm 100% on their side. I just think that they ought to be laying siege, yes, to police precincts, and also, for that matter, to the homes and offices of the district attorneys and the assistant district attorneys and the judges in their communities. And they ought to make those people feel afraid. This is a big deal. And the reason people are this mad is because they're being murdered. And so laying siege to the DA's house where he feels like he has to get his entire family and move to another state until the trial's over. Yeah. That's what it's like to live in fear, dude. That's exactly why it's your responsibility to put these cops in prison for a very long time. And the protesters absolutely have a right to make the responsible individuals feel accountable probably for the first times in their lives. And so burning down a police precinct, and no one was killed in that. The precinct building was empty at the time, I think is acceptable, especially like if you know it's not going to spread to innocent people's property next door, that kind of thing. But, I'm always against when they block freeways. Like, man, you might have somebody on their way to visit their dying mother. You might have somebody in an ambulance on their way to get their life saved at a hospital. You might have somebody late for a flight for the last chance to see their dad again, or to close a business deal that's going to be the most important thing that's going to decide their fate for the next 10 years of their life, or something huge. Why pick on random motorists? You don't know who you're messing with or what kind of hurry that they might be in for what kind of emergency. So why pick unfairly on random people? And I guess if the message is, well, the cops are unfairly picking on random people, okay, fine, but so don't be like them. Be specific. And there's a reason why you have people rioting in cities all across the country. It's because they all feel the same way. And I know young people feel like they're young and indestructible and everything, but if you're out in the middle of a riot and there's arson fires going on and there's cops everywhere, you know that you are putting yourself in danger. These cops might just open fire like Kent State or God knows what. These people are taking a major risk to make it known that they have absolutely had it. And, I was interviewed by some foreigners yesterday. I don't know what countries they're from or what, man, but I was interviewed by these guys somewhere far east of here. And they were asking me, Donald Trump was bragging and boasting about anti-police riots in Iran. Well, how does he feel now? How do you guys feel now that apparently your country isn't much more stable than Iran is? And I'm going, yeah, that's right. And it's partly because of the empire, right? Because instead of working to create a more perfect union here in our limited constitutional republic, and instead of making sure that people are treated fairly, we've been over there worrying about treating people in the Arab world unfairly. And don't forget the Pashtuns and the Somalis. We've been over there treating people unfairly and focusing all our efforts and all our money, all our capital. For the last 20 years, we've been blowing it, destroying things instead of making America a better place to live. And, instead of, for one thing, focusing on how to rein in our cops who are essentially nothing but rabid dogs. I mean, maybe if you're in the middle of an armed robbery, maybe you have to call them because they have a monopoly on being your security force. And if you're not armed and this is all you got, that's all you got. But you better hope when they show up that they don't, make a mistake and blow you away, because they do that. They're so primed for violence. They do that. They show up. I remember one in North Austin, would have been 2 or 3 years ago, 70-something-year-old white man. And I'm saying that because the importance of that is it would be, you would think, contrary to the brainwashed prejudice of the cop, right? I'm not saying that there's anything more innocent about white people. I'm just saying that you would think that a cop would sort of, feel that way when it comes to his, instincts and reactions and things. Old white man, 70-something years old, calls the sheriff's department, says, I think somebody's trying to break in my back door. Please send a deputy out. The deputy comes out. The old man meets him in the driveway. He's holding his gun. It's pointed down at the ground. He's not pointing the gun at the cop. It's his own gun. It's his own property. He was essentially beating the cop to the task of searching for this burglar who I was trying to break into his house. The cop gets out of his car and goes, "Drop the gun!" And the old man clearly is thinking, no, you dummy, I'm the homeowner, right? Like, or might have even been confused. Are you shouting at me? What, is the guy behind me or something? And then the cop just blows him away because the old man doesn't drop the gun in the first instant. When if it was you and you were the one who had called 911, wouldn't you be surprised that the cop is screaming, drop the gun at you when you're the good guy? And he's in his 70s. So he's not used to, cops being trained that every citizen is Osama bin Laden trying to cut your throat. And the cop just murdered him. Just blew him away. And guess what, Kyle? Got away with it. Well, the guy had a gun. The fact that this is Texas and he had every right to have a gun and that in no way did he threaten the cop with it, it's completely irrelevant. Qualified immunity. Scot-free you go. And of course, people who are poorer and blacker get it the worst. Same for Mexicans. The poor of the neighborhood. Poor white people get it too. I mean, if you look at the raw numbers, cops kill more white people than black people, which of course the proportions are different. But if you read the Free Thought Project, cops kill Americans every single day. Every single day. I dare Kyle's audience, you people, to subscribe to the Free Thought Project newsletter every evening. The cops kill Americans every single day, and there's no accountability at all. And the solution's obvious, okay? The solution is you destroy qualified immunity immediately. You just destroy that doctrine. The judges made it up. It's the most un-American thing in the world. It's no different than the Queen's license to 007 to kill. Okay, you just, as Thomas Jefferson said, as I just said about the sequel trilogy, you just trot it out before the people and declare it not law. Qualified immunity is no longer the law. And that's retroactive too. There's no statute of limitations on murder. That is step one. And then step two is to abolish for all time with a constitutional goddamn amendment if you have to abolish the late night SWAT raid in America, the no-knock SWAT raid, which was invented by Nelson Rockefeller and for, the war on pot in the 1970s. And it's just sickening, the fact that, like, let me put it to you this way. If you were really for the drug war, if there's anyone in this audience who still does believe in the drug war, how many innocent people killed every year by SWAT teams is too many, right? Like, I get it. Legalizing drugs means you're sending the wrong message to the children. But how about killing innocent people in the name of searching for contraband, searching for a product that one adult sells to another adult? Oops, wrong house. Oops, perp used to live here 6 years ago, but doesn't anymore. Oops, nice lady's dead. Dead. How many of those is acceptable? The answer is 0. The answer is no American should ever have their door kicked in the middle of the night. When I was a kid, I'm a bit older than you, Kyle. When I was a kid in the 1980s, they taught us about communism. It was part of our class in 5th grade, was to teach us about why our system is good and the Soviet one is bad. Okay? And the bottom line was, there, they tell you what to do. Here, you can do whatever you want unless you really do something wrong, commit a crime, and then you make yourself the government's business. Otherwise, you live your life. You're free. Pick your own job. You pick your own career. You pick your own friends and your own love and your own whatever you want. Unlike the slaves over there in the Soviet communist dictatorship, where if you fall out of line with the government, they come and they get you in the middle of the night. Like the boogeyman, come and steal you out of your bed in the middle of the night, and then you're never seen again. That was the definition of what it meant to live in a totalitarian state. How do we put up with this? How did the American people ever tolerate this for a minute? They created the SWAT team, they said, for bank robber hostage situations, not for executing warrants against civilian homes on almost every time. I mean, 90% of the time, nonviolent crimes. Drug possession and trading crimes, and even when it's murder suspects they're after. Why can't they show up at 7 a.m. when the sun is up and say over the bullhorn, we know you're in there, come out with your hands up? Instead, they got to dress up like the Delta Force and kick in people's doors and kill them, kill their family members. So there should be, by whatever means necessary, all 50 states should pass laws. The federal government should do whatever they can to enforce their end of this. If it has to be a constitutional amendment, do that. I mean, you could do something like highway funds or whatever it is where the federal government can blackmail the states. That you're going to pass laws banning this practice from now on. It's called the USA is a free country, and if you don't like it, you can go and shoot yourself act. Banning nighttime SWAT raids permanently from now on. And any cop who does one goes to prison for 20 years. Something. That's it. This should absolutely be a line in the sand. What are we supposed to do? After all these riots now, what's next? Nothing? What's next is, you know what? You better respect the flag, boy, and I don't want to hear it. Is that the answer? And we're just going to go on like this? And I don't even know which all cities have riots, but I know it's like 10 of them.
Yep.
There were no riots in Austin. They killed a guy in Austin, was 2-3 weeks ago. Somebody called the cops on a guy for sitting in his car in an apartment parking lot. They suspected that maybe he was rolling a joint. So they called the Gestapo, and they came and they murdered the guy. In fact, what happened was he stands up. He goes, I don't have a gun, because the caller said they think he has a gun. He's like, I don't have a gun. Look, he has his hands up, and then he grabs his shirt and he pulls his shirt up so they can see his waist. And he's like, look, dude, I got nothing. I got nothing. And then the rookie girl cop with an itchy finger shoots her beanbag round at him. We know it's just a shotgun blast. It's a beanbag, later, but right now you just got shot with a shotgun. And the guy goes, and falls back in his car, throws it in gear and takes off. Another cop lights him up with his AR-15 and kills the guy. And there should have been riots in Austin then. How do we allow these people to claim a monopoly on the right to use aggressive force in our communities? And how can we have a system where there's no accountability when they break the law? I'm sorry, I'm just rambling now, so I'll say one last thing. There's a great article. Everyone should read it. It's called Tamir Rice. That's Tamir. Remember him? He was the little boy, 12 years old, with a toy gun who was sitting at the park playing. And the cops rolled up. The cop jumped out of the passenger side and waxed him immediately. Just blew him away within 2 seconds. Gave him no chance to drop it. Nothing. Just killed him. And there's this great lawyer. His name's Scott Greenfield. And he wrote this article called Tamir Rice's Basically Reasonable Murder. And it's about how there is no law that says cops can't kill you. Or wherever it is, if any states do have laws like that, then the qualified immunity doctrine overrules it. And the qualified immunity doctrine says that there's only one restriction on a cop's right to take your life. No matter who you are, no matter what you're suspected of, even if you're suspected of nothing. The only way, the only thing is that it has to be reasonable, as per the term reasonable in the Fourth Amendment, that no one shall be subject to unreasonable searches and seizures. So that includes the seizure of your life. And as long as the seizure of your life is reasonable, then that's it. Now, if you kill me, you have to prove that you had no choice, but you're not a cop. If you're a cop, the standard is far lower. The standard is essentially nothing, because the standard is it has to be reasonable, but reasonable is not to be defined by the jury. This is all judge-made law. No legislature ever said that this is the case. Only judges just made this up out of whole cloth. That not only is it just reasonable that applies, but only other cops can decide what's reasonable. And what do other cops say? Other cops say that only the cop who made the call in the moment can say what's reasonable. And so now that translates to, at the end of the chain of court decisions, that means that all a cop has to say is he was afraid. He does not have to illustrate in any way why any other reasonable human being would also be afraid in the same circumstances. Just he was, and you cannot second guess that. So by the time you get through the chain of court decisions, this all amounts to an absolute license to kill. It means that, in fact, even when we saw this one the other day, where a cop beat his wife to death on a Saturday night when he was off the clock, and he still was allowed to get away with it because he's a cop. It's in the group. But, but for most of them, it means as long as they're on the clock, they can kill anyone. Anyone.
Yeah. Well, the qualified immunity is so huge.
Black lady, wrong address. They kicked in the door. She was unarmed, and they just blew her away. And she had tried to resist by pushing back the door or something like that. And they just, little old lady. And they go, well, we were afraid because she was providing, putting up resistance when they're the ones kicking in her door over a pot charge. And, oh, sorry, we were looking for somebody who lived here a long time. Oh, not now. Something very close to that. And it happens constantly. So, something has to give. Something absolutely has to give. And, I don't know, Kyle, if recent experience with the lockdowns is going to help inspire a change of heart on the right at all about this. I tend to think the riot, whatever change of heart the right might have, will be extinguished by the riots, and the collateral damage against innocent property is going to push them back the other way to law and order, boy, and all of that. But it was just a couple of weeks ago that right-wingers were saying that the cops are being unlawful in the way that they are enforcing these edicts on the lockdown. And so, if the cop telling you can't open your small business feels like oppression, well, what do you think it feels like when they murder your brother, right? Is it really that hard to, have a little bit of moral imagination about how other people feel when they're being victimized? I know it usually does take it for it to happen to you too, right? You hear about a millionaire donates a bunch of money to the MS Foundation when his sister gets MS, right? Not before, but when it touches him personally, then he goes, oh, okay, we should find a cure for that, or whatever it is, right? And that is how people are. I understand that. But okay, so now you see how it is. Now you see in the last few weeks and months, upper middle class white people, what it's like when the government treats you arbitrarily. And in 99.999% of the cases, non-violently. They just won't let you open your store, which is really bad. But think about how it feels when they kill your dad. In this case, they said the guy in Minneapolis had passed a bogus $20 bill. Well, I presume him innocent. And then you know what I read too? He'd gone up to Minneapolis for work, but then guess what? The lockdown had put him out of work. So if it is true that he was passing a bogus $20 bill, sounds like blowback from the lockdown that all those right-wingers hate. This is a poor, desperate guy. So he went ahead, supposedly, allegedly, passed a counterfeit $20 bill to get something to eat in the lockdown that all these right-wingers hate. Yep. And so, yeah, it shouldn't be that hard to put your shoe on the other foot. It should never be that hard to put your shoe on the other foot. Just like with Russia. What if the Russians had won the Cold War and brought all of Latin America into the Warsaw Pact, and then they tried to use a bunch of Nazis to overthrow the government of Canada and install a pro-Russian government in Canada? How would we feel about that? Right, we would go to war with them. Well, same thing for them. That's exactly what we're doing to them, but we accept them to just sit there and take it. Look at Israel-Palestine. If you put the shoe on the other foot for 1 minute, the Palestinian Arab, Muslims, and Christians had rounded up all the Jews and put them in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank and had them rounded up in these ghettos and banned from driving on Arab-only roads and whatever kinds of, abducting their children out of their beds in the middle of the night and giving them military tribunals in a foreign language and administrative detention without even the pretension of law and all of the rest of this stuff. How intolerable would that be? It would be so obviously, blatantly intolerable, it would probably cause a war in a day, right? If I Dream of Jeannie just put the shoe on the other foot somehow in Israel-Palestine. America would go to war to liberate the Israeli Jews from their oppression. But somehow, when it's the current status quo, that's perfectly acceptable. What if cops treated the rich white part of town the way they treated the poor black part of town? Wouldn't that be horrible? Yeah, it would. And wouldn't you hate it? Wouldn't you resent? Wouldn't you feel like the rest of your society had abandoned you if they didn't care what was happening to you? That's how they feel.
Yeah.
How much imagination does that take? Not much. A willingness only to try it is all,
Right. Well, it probably has something to do with our, police going to Israel and getting training that has to
Absolutely
do that.
Does.
They're, treating more of us like Palestinians. And I think, this is an older story, but I remember one where some old man got pulled over, and rather than, acting like any black American would know to act by just putting their hands on the steering wheel and waiting, hopped out of his truck and went to grab the cane out of the bed of his truck. And the cop shot him because, that's what you're allowed to do. Right. Because anybody is a potential threat, and this old man who's barely able to stand his gun and grab a rifle and apparently blow this cop away, but that's what they're allowed to do.
Just a cane, I remember that. Yep.
Talking about bringing this to the rich white part of town, apparently that's where Duncan Lemp lived, and they just killed him, right. And yep. That happened right at the beginning of or a little bit before maybe the crackdown. And everything, but I guess interesting that there really hasn't had. I think his family was even threatened if they held protests that they would be arrested. And
they did hold at least one good one. I know that.
Okay, yeah, but just maybe that part of this isn't. I've heard at least from reporting that there's a lot of white people out there mixed in with the black protesters, and I guess in Atlanta last night, the riot police were all lined up against the protesters, and all the white people went to the front and put their hands up. Because that many of them understand that, the police are able to kill their, fellow black Americans with that much more impunity than themselves.
That's great.
And so
that's great. I saw that too in a clip from Dallas where a white guy was taunting the cops, and another white guy was telling him to be quiet, and the first guy started telling him to go and lick their boots if that's how he feels about it, and this kind of thing too. So yeah, it is definitely, it's good to, and the Black Lives Matter movement made a huge mistake naming their movement that. I mean, the reality is that the issue is accountability for killer cops, no matter who they kill. And right now the law is that they can get away with it. So chanting Black Lives Matter, I mean, it's true. Yeah, that black people are born with natural rights, just like everybody else. Damn right. That point should be made if it's not being well understood. But let's go ahead. The movement should be named after the actual brass tacks. It should be the Accountability for Killer Cops movement. And then so exactly what's going on right now, right there. They are demanding 50 new laws in all 50 states, undoing the power of these cops to get away with murder,
Yeah. Well, Scott, we've been doing this for a while, so it might be a good time to wrap up. But everybody, make sure you check out and are subscribed to the Scott Horton Show, which I'm sure you are if you're a fan of this show. But you're going over to the Libertarian Institute. I'm pretty sure everything that myself and Scott publishes ends up there. And antiwar.com. Anything else, Scott?
I think that's it. Thanks very much, Kyle, for everything, buddy.
Thanks.
All right, talk soon.